What's up, everybody? It's your boy Tru Element 78 in the building with
Your one and only reigning and defending Mondo Lucha Hall of Famer, the X-Man Xavier Mustafa.
And it is I, the infamous one, the natural Chris Black.
and today you're tuned into our continuing special edition of Saturday Night Slamcasters, where we review Viceland's Dark Side of the Ring series. And today we are here to discuss the assassination of Dino Bravo. I know before this episode aired that Chris Black had mentioned this was one of the episodes he was looking most forward to. So what did you think of this episode?
Shit. Must be opposite day. Well, to be totally honest, it's like I remember Dino Bambino. Whoops, that's MAW guy. I remember Dino Bravo from watching him in WWF.
Damn.
Yeah.
He's been drinking tonight, people.
I did not know that he was assassinated. Going into once I saw the lineup of Dark Side of the Ring, I had no idea that he was assassinated. So it was kind of intriguing, but at the same time, this is probably not one of their best episodes. It was just very cut and dry. This is what happened here. This is what happened there. He got into this, and then he got shot. So very, I don't know, paint by the numbers episode. They could have gone a little more into detail of his run in WWF, but maybe there wasn't much to tell. Like I said, I mean, he was a big dude. Vince liked big guys, but as you will find out, Vince likes to test people who challenge him, and Dino did.
Xavier Mustafa, what did you think of this episode?
Whew. Okay, so no disrespect to the Dino Bravo family, but this was probably the most boringest episode that I've ever watched in my life. It was just so monotone and flat, and I just really couldn't get into it. One thing I will say, I do want to give a shout out to the Canadian government because you don't ever hear nothing about anything going on in Canada. They got a whole mob, like what? And they didn't have to shoot dude 87 times. Like, he was dead already. But we'll get into that.
Right. The interesting thing about this episode to me was the parallels kind of to, we covered the Gino Hernandez story from the first season. And again, it's a recurring theme. We talked about it on the last episode where we reviewed Dark Side of the Ring, having daughters named Nancy and allowing them to marry wrestlers, and cocaine will get you killed. So stay away from drugs. Don't do drugs, and don't have daughters named Nancy. We're going to continue to preach that because it's a reoccurring theme on all these Dark Side of the Ring episodes. Also, I want everybody to know that they have been renewed for season 3, so that's going to be coming as well. Don't know possibly what they're going to be covering, but it has been renewed. Now, my thoughts on this episode. I thought that this was one of their weaker episodes, and it wasn't necessarily that the story was weak of Dino Bravo. It was more of a case that they kind of glossed over his career to not really tell the story of how big he was and how big of an ego he had, kind of due to how big that he was back then. Like they kind of just gloss over the fact that they're like, he was the international wrestling's Hulk Hogan, and if they had a pay-per-view between Hogan and Dino Bravo, that if that had happened, they're like, they couldn't have held that in just a regular arena, which it was planned, and then it was canceled because they were like, Hogan's probably going to get booed. It would have been a similar situation back to, hopefully one day is released and put on the network, when they did a Snake Pit segment with Hulk Hogan and Jake the Snake Roberts, and Jake the Snake DDT'd Hogan. And everybody knows that Jake the Snake Roberts is one of the greatest heels of all time, if not the greatest heel of all time. And at this time, he was still a heel, but he DDT'd Hulk Hogan and got a huge pop from all accounts. And that's kind of what it would have been if they had held this match, because it was scheduled to happen in Canada. So let's kind of just start it from the beginning. So they mentioned that his death took place on March 10th, 1993, and that possible people involved could have been a family friend or the mafia or somebody from the Indian tribal lands that he was dealing with when he got into the shady parts of his life. But like I said, we'll get there. So the episode kind of just starts with him being in international wrestling. I felt that it should have started with his relationship with the WWF, because he did have a relationship with WWF a little bit before he had the relationship with international wrestling, where he actually had a relationship with WWF good enough where he was the Canadian world champion. WWE had given him his own title to defend in Canada. And that's where the match with Hogan came in. And they told him he was going to wrestle Hogan. It ended up not happening. And instead, I believe they ended up having him wrestle Big John Studd, and Hogan fought somebody else on that card, and it pissed Dino Bravo off because he knew the type of money that he could have made and what that could have drew. And so from that point on, WWE they basically got rid of that belt, which I found interesting. They got rid of the Canadian Heavyweight Championship belt. I was like, if they had created that back then in like 1985, they should have brought that back when Bret Hart was doing his whole heel thing. You know what? When he was like, I'm the Canadian champion or something, that could have been worked in.
Yeah, but I feel like since they had the Intercontinental belt that they just kind of pulled out their ass at that a tournament in Argentina or Buenos Aires or whatever. I guess that was them combining like the North American Championship, Canadian Championship, Mexican or whatever championship, probably to kind of cover all of North and South America.
Right. Something that they talked about in here, and I'm gonna hop on Xavier Mustafa for this. They talked about how in international wrestling, it was ran by Gino Brito and Tony Moulay, I believe is how you say his name. And they were the two promoters and owners. And Dino was the booker. And he said that Dino kind of created himself. He created the persona. He put on the matches that he wanted to do, and he booked himself in the main events. For the most part, always put himself in the main events. And so he created himself into a superstar. What is that like when you wrestle for your own company, and the pressures that kind of puts on you, or the eye that it puts on you when you're the booker of your company and you also wrestle in your company?
Me personally, I hate it. I've never been that person that, because I'm in that position, I'm going to put myself over everybody else, because at the end of the day, it's about making money. It's about giving the fans what they want or what they don't want in a way where they end up wanting it, if that makes any sense. So, I mean, if I'm super over and it makes sense, I'll do it, but I wouldn't do it at the expense of the other talent.
But when
I
you
think that's
necessarily
very
have to,
poor decision making.
but when you necessarily
This
have
was the
to,
first sign to me that Dino Bravo was kind of full of himself and kind of like an asshole because, like Mustafa was saying, there's a lot of pressure. If you're the booker and you are booking yourself as the star or the main attraction, like unless he was that over, that's just not a good look. I mean, even in Legacy Pro, like when they put the heavyweight title on me, I felt it was no big. It's not a secret in the business that Mustafa and TC are both, really good friends of mine. So we didn't want it to be like, oh, well, they just put their friend over. No, that meant that by carrying that title, I had to work the hardest and make the fans see that I deserved the title and deserved to run with it, and I wasn't just some fly by night champ.
but I was also gonna say, like you said, you got to be, if you're over enough. But if you're the booker, you can book yourself to be over enough, unless the fans just completely can see through the character that you're trying to portray.
And
Oh,
that's what you risk.
yeah, I mean, there's been some delusional guys that have booked people that they thought would be over and just wouldn't be, or they were kind of delusional and thought they were more over than they really were. By the sound of it, it seems like Dino was kind of like the Hulk Hogan of Montreal. But again, if you book yourself as the unbeatable guy and impressive big physique and all that, yeah, you're probably gonna get over back then.
Build himself as the strongest man in the world before Mark Henry.
Yeah.
So one more thing just to ask about that, because you haven't always had Legacy Pro. Were you ever in any other feds where the booker was also a competitor and kind of always put themselves over and put belts on themselves? And what type of heat did,
Oh yeah.
and what type of heat did that draw in the locker room? Because they talked in here to, well, they mainly talked to uh, Jacques Rousseau or whatever, the Mountie, and he was saying that there was a little bit of resentment in the locker room due to him always putting himself over in them championship positions. So what type of heat does that necessarily draw from the boys in the back? And does it also cause some people to maybe work with that person with light hands, or they're a little bit more stiff with them out there in the ring?
Okay, so before I answer that question, was it me or did Jacques Rougeau look like Kurt Angle in like 20 years?
Yeah, I didn't
Rousseau is like
recognize him.
60. He looked good for his age.
I literally had to do a double take. I was like, they put Kurt Angle on this? I was like, oh yeah, that's okay. That's it. So I've been in some promotions where that has happened. And generally what happens is they pretty much get laughed at by the rest of the undercard. And, you know, especially if they're not over. I've seen it where people will force themselves to, you know, I mean, I've seen it where they would totally shit on something else that's going on in their promotion just because it was getting more over than what they were booking themselves in. And so that to me is when it becomes a problem. Now, they didn't have to worry about anybody, you know, being a little stiff with them in the ring because 90% of the time they're working their friends anyway, and their friends were just along for the ride. So now on a rare occasion, maybe one promotion I worked for where a guy was legitimately over and he put himself in those top positions. But even then, I was still like, you know, you should probably try to help somebody else get over. Because, I mean, he just stayed there. Like, nobody else was able to get to his level because they already had him.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest problem that I've come across, I'm not going to speak for Mustafa, was bookers putting their friends in their top spots. And I'm not going to name no names, but it seems to be the thing that we do. But me, Mustafa, and TC were involved in an angle once with one promotion with three other guys, and our feud was hot. And in my opinion, we should have had the main event cage match and not who they picked to do the main event cage match, because that match was not as hot as ours. So, you know, not to pat myself on the back, but we all knew those guys were all friends of the booker, so of course they're gonna book themselves into like the main event.
So you guys could have had the Wyatts versus the Shield in this federation, basically.
Basically.
Yeah.
So, like I said, he booked himself into the top position, became the biggest draw in international wrestling. He had worked with the WWE. They gave him his own belt. They had scheduled a match, told him he's going to get a match with Hogan. They ended up canceling on him. And once they canceled on him, he kind of said, screw it. It was like he doesn't want to be a part of the WWF. He had a chip on his shoulder. He was going to do everything that he could to make international wrestling as big as the WWE. And so now today is why we still have the rivalry between international wrestling and WWE, which is going strong, and they're having viewership wars. Actually, I'm in the alternate timeline. International wrestling didn't make it. They made it less than a year after that, because WWE was doing their expansion across the country and poaching talent from all the different territories, and this happened to be one of them. And that's actually when they brought in Jacques Rougeau and Haku, and they had brought in Andre the Giant. They had poached pretty much all of the top talent from international, from international wrestling. So eventually had to shutter their doors, and Dino pretty much had no choice but to go to WWE, and they gave him a guaranteed contract of $300,000 a year, and the possibility to make up to $1 million, depending on, you know, how things worked out for him there. So he came in as a babyface. They eventually turned him heel, had him dye his hair blonde, so he was an Italian, French Canadian blonde guy now. and he really resented that. And also, they had him become a heel, and he didn't really like that because he had only ever worked as a babyface, so he knew how to work one way. And also, he couldn't really speak English very well. He had broken English, so they paired him with Jimmy Hart, and we all know who Jimmy Hart is. And Jimmy Hart can, if he can't get you over, I don't know what to tell you. I think he is one of the best mouthpieces ever in professional wrestling at putting over his talent. And let me ask you guys, if you could have either Bobby Heenan, Jimmy Hart, or Paul Heyman as your manager, who would you pick and why?
Bobby Heenan, because to me, out of those three, he was probably the best manager ever.
Actually, better way to phrase that. Put them in order. Who would be your third pick, second pick, and your number one pick?
Okay. Bobby Heenan, number one. I think his character and the character of Chris Black would mesh really well. Number two, Paul Heyman, for probably the exact same reasons. And I don't think me and Jimmy Hart would have made a good pairing.
So what are the names again?
Jesus Christ. The attention of a butterfly. All right, so I said Paul Heyman, Jimmy Hart, and Bobby Heenan.
Oh, I thought there was some more choices there. Yeah, I gotta go with the same order as Chris Black. I guess if I was a babyface, I guess Jimmy Hart would work, but it wouldn't work for me as a heel. I don't ever think he was really a good heel manager, but definitely Bobby Heenan up front. That'll be some very, very hilarious promos and some very hilarious matches. And then Paul Heyman, oh my God, I just wouldn't even want to say anything when Paul Heyman's coming to promo.
Right? I'll just let him do. I'd be like Brock, let him just do the majority of the talking.
All right, so WWE, they got him. Like I said, he had been one of the biggest names in the industry, but once WWE got him, he was almost into his 40s, and they just turned him into a jobber. He lost. He did finally get a match with Hogan. He jobbed the Hogan. He jobbed the Ultimate Warrior. He jobbed the Macho Man. He just basically became a guy that counted the lights every single night. And so when 1992 came around, they decided to let him go.
If I'm not mistaken, Bret Hart's documentary Wrestling with Shadows, he was always talking about how he prided himself on never hurting anybody. And he said I think he recalled one time where he got his sternum cracked or crushed was when Dino Bravo bumped him off the apron and he landed right on the guardrail and crunch.
Now, in that situation, do you blame, is that Bret's fault or is that Dino's fault?
I don't think he blamed Dino, but maybe he's like the momentum. Maybe he wasn't expecting the momentum.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, he did not blame Dino, but he was like, that was kind of reckless.
All right. Well, in 1992, they decided to let him go, and he had no idea what he was going to do without wrestling because it was all he had known from, I believe, like 1970. That was all he had done. So for 22 years, all he had known was professional wrestling. And I don't think you can just go and start flipping burgers and French fries after that. So he had to figure out a way that he was going to support his family. And one thing that was going on in Montreal at the time was a lot of corruption due to the mafia. You had the Vic Catroni family, who was the first mafia family of Montreal. And he was also the uncle of Dino Bravo. And they were doing work for the Rizzuto family from Sicily. And so
also was an ex-wrestler from the 30s.
Yeah, Vic Catrino was not Rizzuto, not the Rizzuto family. So
yeah, no.
So wrestling, drugs, and rock and roll. The rock and wrestling connection just makes a lot more sense. It's the further you go down the rabbit hole, just drugs, sex, rock and roll, and wrestling should just be thrown in there. Nowadays, it's video games, wrestling, and virgins, but So like I said, Dino was out of the wrestling business. He needed work, so he went to go work for his uncle. And what was going on at this time was there was a heavy tax on cigarettes that were being imported and manufactured in Montreal to the point where the black market was going to native lands and working with the natives to basically repackage cigarettes and make cigarettes there in Montreal. And they were big wrestling fans, and so they would send Dino over there, and he had worked out a deal with them to get the cigarettes and redistribute them and basically just move product for them. And so they were making a killing. There was one point where they said that I think they said that they were selling packs of cigarettes for like $5 a pack, which was like half the price of if they had to actually just go buy them legally. So $10 a pack for cigarettes. I know Chris Black used to smoke. How much are cigarettes now, or how much were they? Would you be willing to pay $10 a pack for some cigarettes?
Well, correction, I did smoke, but it was not cigarettes. I smoked Black and Mild. I cannot stand the taste of cigarettes. But I did used to work at a grocery store, and I remember when cigarettes were early 90s or mid 90s, they were like $5 a pack. Now, shit. I'm assuming they're probably around 10 or 11 bucks a pack now.
And you're saying here in the States it was $5 a pack, and that was in the 90s here. So they were $10 in Canada, and we know how much taxes are in Canada. At least I do. I've been to Canada a lot, especially Montreal. Like their tax is like 11%. So
damn,
it's like 11 to 15%. So
do they have income tax there?
Yes.
They have income tax too. Okay.
The whole time they're doing all this talk about counterfeit cigarettes, all I kept thinking about was the opening scene of Beverly Hills Cop. I'm like, wow, they really counterfeit cigarettes?
No, I was thinking about The Simpsons because I remember there was a mafia episode on The Simpsons where they were importing cigarettes or doing bootleg cigarettes. And I was like, that was based on real life. Like you can just roll your own cigarettes, buy your own tobacco. But I guess I digress. But yeah, so they were huge wrestling fans. Dino worked out a deal with them. He was moving the cigarettes. He was able to maintain his flashy lifestyle that he had picked up when he was in the WWF, which I hadn't mentioned previously. When he was signed that $300,000 deal, he had went and built a house, and him and I believe it was Tony Moulay, they had built their house next to each other, and at the same time in this subdivision, this very expensive subdivision. So he built a house. He went out and bought a really fancy drop top car. I believe it's like a Porsche or a Lamborghini or a Mercedes or something like that. And his daughter, who was 4 years old, he even bought her a car, and she was only 4 years old, and said, "This is going to be yours one day." And so, like I said, when he left WWE, he had to find something that could keep the lights on and pay for that house and pay for those cars and everything that he had gotten accustomed to. So everybody out there, educate yourselves about money before you get it. Don't try to learn about money once you get it. Try to learn it before you get it so you know what to do with it and keep it. But anyway, so he's working for the mafia. Everything's going smooth. But he's becoming such a big name in the mafia world that people who deal with harder substances, such as cocaine, decided to approach him and try to work out a deal on getting in on the cigarette racket. And so they worked out a deal with Dino, and I believe it was a something he had set up with the natives to where it was like $400,000 were involved in it, and the mafia that he had worked out the deal with, the cocaine pushers, were supposed to go and pick up the product, but they didn't go and get it when they were supposed to. They waited 3 days to go and get it, and when they did show up to go and pick it up, they were busted by the police, and people blamed Dino for this. And Dino said, "I know nothing about this. You guys were supposed to get it 3 days ago, and you went to go get it late, and you got busted. So it's your fault." But
$400,000.
Yeah, so you lose $400,000. It doesn't really matter whose fault it is. Everybody's heads are gonna roll. So from that point on, he kind of knew he had a target on his back, and it was just a matter of time before it caught up with him. So.
Yeah, didn't that happen like days before the murder?
I believe so. But so what ends up happening from there is kind of nobody really knows. All we know is that Dino is found dead in his living room with the TV remote in his hands, and his family discovered him once his wife and daughter came home from ballet practice, which they gave the time that they went to ballet. I think it was like from like 8 to, and they got home a little before midnight. I was like, that is a late ballet class for a kid, but I digress.
No, I think they went to see the ballet. I don't think it was a class. I think it was a ballet performance.
Who takes a 6-year-old to see a ballet performance?
Someone who's serious about ballet.
I mean,
Without
you think
her
about all
husband.
the. Hey, every time we seen Martha Wayne die, it was always super late at night.
But she was with her husband at the movies.
Right, with their son.
Yeah, but it was at.
She loses her pearls every time.
But it was a movie they were watching, not a ballet with a 6-year-old. Batman was like 11 years old.
Yeah, but you know, it's odd. They were saying, you were just describing how he was killed sitting in his in the living room with the remote in his hand, which led them to believe that this was something by someone that he knew.
Yeah, they said
because you would have been extra comfortable. Because if there were strangers or someone that was hostile to you, why would you just be sitting there with your TV remote in your hand like you don't have a care in the world, unless they posed the body that way? But dude, to get shot 11 times in the body, 7 in the head, that was some vengeful shit. You had to really want to make sure he was dead.
Let me correct that because it was crazy. Like I did some other research and everybody was saying he got shot 17 times. According to Dark Side of the Ring, he was shot 4 times in the body and 7 times in the head.
Oh, okay. So maybe shot a total of 11.
He shot a total of 11.
Okay.
But yeah.
Still, goddamn, it only takes 1 bullet to really kill you. Shit, 2 to make sure you dead.
And it was shot by 2 different weapons, which also made some people think it was 2 individuals that may have done it, and then some people say it was 1 and he just used multiple guns to make it look like it was 2 people. But they also say that it appeared to be no struggle. The door seemed like it hadn't been locked or messed with, and so the person had to already been inside unless somebody left the door unlocked when they left. And so he's found dead in his home. His daughter fortunately she was asleep at the time. I don't know how his wife was carrying his daughter into the house and didn't scream when she saw that and wake the daughter up. But she ran to the next door neighbor's house, which again was the former promoter for International Wrestling, and they called the police. And like I said, the police came and investigated. They were able to figure out who committed the crime, and it's still open to this day. They even gave the number to provide tips if you have any information at the end of the episode. One of the interesting things about this as well was they said 9 months earlier, an accountant for the mafia had been killed in that same neighborhood. And then 4 months after Dino Bravo was murdered, another cigarette smuggler was killed in that same neighborhood because, like I said, it was a high-end neighborhood. It was for people who were making money. So they said that a lot of the mafia people had moved into the neighborhood. So that's also why it's believed that whoever killed him was friendly with him at least. And the reason he wasn't with his daughter and his wife that night was that he was watching the hockey game. So he probably did have some people over to watch the hockey game, and maybe they went to the bathroom or something, got behind him and did their work. And they said the only evidence that there had been a shootout, like physical evidence on the outside of the house, was that 1 bullet may have went through him, or maybe they missed 1 shot and it had broken a window. That was the only way to tell anything had happened on the inside. And also they said none of the neighbors heard because they may have had silencers.
Damn.
You know what? Wait, what year did this happen?
93.
93.
93. Jimmy Snuka. He did this shit.
Cocaine. Like
that was before New Jack, so.
That New Jack was 1988.
Well, his weapon of choice is a knife, so.
Anything sharp is not
even
stabbed.
A knife. He been stabbed 11 times. Maybe we thought it was New Jack.
Yeah, Snuka did that shit.
It was Vince.
He was like, "Oh, you messing with Nancy?" We're like, "No, it's not your Nancy. It's my Nancy. Sorry."
And so it seems they said they tried to interview Rick Martel, who was one of his closest confidants and friends as far as in the business. And he was like the only person that he would speak to about any of the mafia things that he had done. But he declined an interview for this episode of Dark Side of the Ring. But they did show a clip of a shoot interview that he had done before, and it kind of makes sense when you see this shoot interview of why he probably declined to do an interview for this, because he said too much. And the Mafia they came and tapped him on that shoulder like, hey, you know you done fucked up, right?
Like, yeah, you don't want that to happen to you, do you?
Yeah, so he pretty much is the one who gave the information about the $400,000 and pretty much how the deal went awry and why Dino is no longer here. And so pretty much from that point on, the last 15 minutes of the episode is filler, and that's why I think this is one of the weakest episodes they had. Like I said, they could have went more into him being tag team champions or being a tag team champion with Earthquake and all the other accolades that he had in his career. They mainly chose to just focus on, hey, he did this with WWE, then he did this in international wrestling, and he signed with WWE. Then WWE fired him. He started dealing cigarettes. He got in trouble with some cocaine people, and then he was killed. And then the last 15 minutes is pretty much showing his family mourning his loss still and talking about how they handled the grief of that. So pretty much once he gets shot, 2 minutes after that, I guess you can cut this episode off.
Well, they did. I think the daughter said that her mom, Dino's wife, got rid of all of his wrestling stuff. So they have nothing, no keepsakes or nothing, because it was just too much for her to bear to keep it. So I wonder who has all of his wrestling stuff. Probably the mom. They probably bought it.
Did it look like it was the casket behind her when she took all that stuff off the table and put it in the box? I was like, did she do this at the funeral? Like, what?
They did say she gave it away to a lot of family and friends, so somebody has a lot of that stuff.
Oh, okay.
I wonder if he still got to keep the belt, because from what I've always heard is back in those days.
I just think it's weird when people get rid of people's wrestling stuff, because, I mean, if you ever had gym clothes and you work out in gym clothes, it don't matter if you wash them or not. They still have this, what's what I'm looking for? Essence of you on it. But people still buy them, especially the women's, if you're one of those creepers.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, you hear about those offers all the time.
Chris Black, quit acting like you haven't bought some of Sonny's underwear.
Hey, I've got a couple pair of them that she's personally handed to me. No.
Personally stuffed in your mouth.
Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you.
But yeah, so like I said, this is one of the weaker episodes. If you're a fan of Dark Side of the Ring, it's worth a watch. If you're curious at all to what happened to Dino Bravo, I would say check out, I believe it was WrestleLamia actually did a I forgot what they call it, something of the Titantron series, and it's
behind the Titantron series.
Yeah, behind the Titantron, and it's 11 minutes long. And I think if you just listen to that, I think you'll probably get more out of that than you will out of the 42-minute runtime of this episode. But if you just want to see the family's emotion and the reenactments, then this is worth a watch. Just know that it is subtitled. That doesn't really bother me. It bothered me for this because I had to take notes, and so I had to watch this episode twice in a day. But next up on the docket, we're gonna have the David Schultz episode, and this is gonna be the slap heard around the world, where Dr. D ended up slapping John Stossel on national television. So that's gonna be a pretty fun episode. Somebody who kayfabe is still alive, it's still real to him, damn it. But other than that, you guys I was gonna say one short
anecdote. Yeah, I got one short anecdote before we go. So I found it interesting that they went and bleached blonde his hair. So when Ken Anderson was being scouted by the WWE when he was still working up in Green Bay, I remember Ken had bleached blonde hair, and the WWE scouts were like, that makes you look too indie. So he went back to his natural, brown colored hair. After a couple other, roadblocks or whatever, he eventually got signed. What was the first thing they had him do? Bleach blonde his hair. It's weird. Some of the hoops they got you going through just to get a contract there.
Yeah, it's kind of funny too how they just talked about like Vince likes to push back at people who push back at him. And so I think Vince kind of saw him coming in with the ego, like, I'm big shit. I was big up there. I should be big here. He's like, nah, motherfucker, I'm in charge here. You not booking.
Right. Well, yeah, they said you're not supposed to come in with an ego, and he came in, his ego had luggage.
Which is also just kind of funny to me because I guess it's a delicate balancing act because like we kind of said, when you're the booker, yeah, you can make yourself be the shit as much as you want to, but you went down here, you signed a $300,000 a year contract, but now you're being told what to do and you're not the shit no more. Like, you can't put yourself in that position. And also when you're booking yourself, it doesn't necessarily matter your ability. Like, and that's one thing I didn't get to do before this episode is go back and watch how he wrestled, how he moved. I know they said that for his size, like, he could definitely move around that ring. But
to be fair, I don't think WWE necessarily gave him a chance to shine in his best way, because if he went from being a normal babyface and working as a babyface, and suddenly he was just like this anti-American heel, maybe that just didn't work for him. I don't know. So I don't know. Maybe they didn't work towards his strengths. But then again, if he had walked in with an ego, I could see them, kind of humbling him.
Yeah, we're gonna make you as uncomfortable as possible. But also, back then there could only be one baby face.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, he couldn't come, stepping on Hogan's toes.
All right. So I think a lot of
But the bleach blonde, I mean, that just
they're trying to make him look like a big Ric Flair.
Yeah. Pretty much.
So other than that, you guys want to give out your social medias or any last thoughts and then give out your social medias?
Well, you can catch me at Xavier Mustafa on Facebook and on Twitter. You can also catch my solo podcast at XM Cinema, wherever you get your podcast fix, as well as XM Cinema on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
And you can catch me at The Natural Chris Black on Instagram and Facebook. And you can catch me at the_natural_CB on Twitter.
You can catch me outside. How about that?
Are we getting paid for that XM Cinema promotion? I need to know.
We can have more people talk to your people.
you didn't get your cut.
but yeah, you
kayfabe.
But anyways, like I said, our next episode is gonna be the David Schultz episode, the slap heard around the world. So be sure you hit that subscribe button here on YouTube, hit that bell so you're notified whenever a new episode is uploaded to the YouTube channel. Also, leave us a like, leave us a comment. We do read those and we will reply to you. You can also find me at Slamcaster TE78 over there on Twitter. You can find us over there on Facebook. You can search Saturday Night Slamcasters or hashtag Come Get Slam. And you can also find us wherever you get your podcast from, whether that be iTunes, Spotify, Google Music, or any of those different things. Go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Completely different content from what you get over here. We cover the weekly episodes of Raw, SmackDown, AEW, ROH, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and all the different wrestling promotions. So like I said, be sure to check out the podcast. Other than that, we up out of here. Holla at your boys. Come get slammed. Peace.